I never imagined that wiring the last installment on my son's mortgage, $12,000 from what remained of my retirement fund, would be the very moment I lost my seat at his table. It was a Tuesday in early September when I sat at my kitchen table in Portland, watching the bank confirmation blink on my laptop screen. Transfer complete. 5 years of co-signing, 5 years of property tax bills arriving in my mailbox, 5 years of roof repairs and plumbing emergencies, and one foundation patch that cost more than I'd made in a month of night shifts. All of it settled. Done. I sat for a moment with my hands around my coffee cup and thought, well, that's that. Now maybe we can just be family. My phone buzzed 3 minutes later. The email was from my daughter-in-law, not from my son. That was the first thing I noticed and the first thing I set aside. She wrote, "Hi, I know this might be hard to hear, but Gavin and I have decided this Hawaii trip really needs to be just the two of us. Our therapist has suggested we use this time to reconnect as a couple without outside family dynamics. We hope you understand, and we truly do love you." I read it 4 times, not because the words were complicated, because I kept waiting for a second paragraph. A follow-up call, an apology, something that sounded like a person who understood the weight of what she had just sent. There wasn't one. There was a row of pink heart emojis at the bottom, which felt like being handed a colored bandage after someone had driven a car through your living room. The tickets had been booked for 3 months. My ticket was already paid for. I had purchased it myself. I had a new swimsuit folded in my dresser drawer, a waterproof camera case, a linen blouse. I'd been saving for the luau dinner my son had mentioned. We'd all go to together on the last night. I had talked about this trip with my friend Cornelia every week since June. She'd started calling it your Hawaii thing, the way you refer to something that belongs to a person because they've clearly claimed it. I put my phone face down on the kitchen table and looked at the bank confirmation still open on my laptop screen. $12,000, transferred this morning. Email received 11:47 a.m. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a registered nurse, 12 of them on the cardiac ICU, which teaches you, among other things, how to absorb something terrible and keep functioning. I have held the hands of strangers at the end of their lives. I know how to maintain a steady voice when nothing inside me is steady. I washed my coffee cup. I dried it with the dish towel my sister had embroidered for my birthday. I put it back in the cabinet. Then I sat back down and gave myself permission to feel every bit of it. My son Gavin is 38. He was 22 when his father died. A fast, brutal stroke that left both of us standing in a hospital corridor I knew from the other side, looking at machines I understood too well. I went back to work 6 weeks later because we needed the income and because sitting still felt like something I wouldn't survive. Gavin finished his architecture degree, moved to Portland, built a life I'm genuinely proud of. He's talented. He's careful and precise in the way his father was. And then, 4 years after we lost his father, he met Jocelyn at a rooftop party in the Pearl District. And within 18 months, they were engaged and in love with a craftsman house in Lake Oswego that neither of them could qualify for on their own. I co-signed because he was my son, and it was a good house and the interest rate was right, and I still had the credit history to make it work. Jocelyn shook my hand across the closing table with both of hers and said, "We couldn't have done this without you." I believed her. I still believe she meant it, at least on that particular Tuesday. That was 5 years ago. In those 5 years, I came to understand the difference between being included and being managed. Jocelyn would text to invite me to dinner, but by the time I arrived there would be a folding chair at the far end of the table, near the kitchen door, where I could hear everything but participate in nothing. She had a habit of finishing my sentences with something slightly different than what I'd meant, then glancing around to see who had noticed. My son noticed. He just quietly decided not to respond. Poppy was born 2 years in, my granddaughter. She had her father's calm eyes and her grandmother's stubbornness, which Jocelyn mentioned often and never as a compliment. I drove 40 minutes each way every Tuesday to watch Poppy while Jocelyn worked on her lifestyle blog. I did that for 18 months, because she asked, and because Poppy smelled like warm bread and made a sound when she laughed that reorganized everything. I stopped only when Jocelyn announced she'd hired a nanny because she needed what she called professional consistency. I understood, I said, the way I always said I understood. So when the Hawaii email arrived that September morning, I cannot truthfully say I was surprised. I was just finally out of reasons to explain it away. My son called at 7 that evening. He waited until after dinner. "I'm sorry, Mom. It's a hard time for us. Jocelyn is really overwhelmed right now." "She emailed me," I said. "She didn't call. You didn't call." "I know. I should have called first. I'm sorry." I asked him how co-signing his mortgage and paying the property taxes for 5 years had placed me in the category of something his marriage needed protection from. He didn't answer that directly. He said he would make it up to me when they returned. He said he loved me. I told him I loved him too, because it was true, and because I didn't yet know what I intended to do. What changed everything was not the email. It was the credit card. I check my statements every 2 weeks. It is a habit from decades of living carefully, of watching numbers with the attention they deserve. I had given Gavin access to that card years ago for actual emergencies, the kind that happen at 2 in the morning when something breaks and nothing else is open. I had never thought twice about it. That is the specific kind of trust that is easy to forget you've given until someone reminds you by spending it. The charge appeared on day 2 of the Hawaii trip. Haleakalani Spa and Wellness, $1,347. I sat with it for a long time, longer than I sat with the email. The email was unkind. The credit card charge was something else. It was clarifying in the way that very cold water is clarifying. It told me that they saw my resources as continuous and unconditional, that I was a line item rather than a person, that my access to that account had been filed somewhere under convenience rather than trust. I called my attorney the next morning. She listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Tell me about the deed." We met on Thursday. I brought every document I had, the original co-signer agreement, 5 years of property tax receipts addressed to my Portland apartment, the roof repair invoice, the foundation work, the water heater I'd replaced the previous January when they told me they were in a tight month. My attorney went through the folder the way she goes through everything, slowly and without expression. "You're a co-owner," she said, "and the mortgage is paid. As of Tuesday." She looked at me over her reading glasses. "You have the right to sell your interest. Given what you've contributed, you'd have standing to push for a partition sale if necessary." She set the folder down. "But I want to ask you honestly, is this what you want? Because legal action closes some doors permanently." I thought about the email, the credit card charge, 18 months of Tuesday drives, the folding chair by the kitchen door. "I want to understand what's possible," I said. "Then let me show you," she said. 3 days later, I went to Lake Oswego to collect some documents I'd stored in the filing cabinet during the foundation work. I had my key. It was still my key. My name was still on the deed. The house was quiet and slightly showroom feeling, the way it always was when Jocelyn had spent time arranging it for photographs. I found what I needed in the cabinet. On my way out, I passed the open door of Jocelyn's home office. I should not have looked at the desk. I looked at the desk. Under a gold-spined planner was a manila folder. Inside it were printed email exchanges between Jocelyn and a Portland real estate attorney. The subject line on the first read, co-owner removal, options going forward. I read it standing up in the quiet of a house I had helped buy. The attorney had outlined 2 approaches. The first involved establishing documented sole occupancy over an extended period. The emails specifically noted that I had not lived in the property and visited only occasionally, and that all utility accounts were held exclusively by Gavin and Jocelyn. The second was a quiet title action, a legal claim to remove a co-owner from the deed based on a pattern of non-residence, particularly effective, the attorney noted, when the co-owner continued to pay expenses without formally asserting her ownership stake. Then there was Jocelyn's reply. She wrote, "The challenge is that she still has a key and comes by regularly. We need to limit that before the occupancy timeline becomes clean. Can we schedule a follow-up call for when G is traveling?" When G is traveling. She hadn't told my son, or she had told him something shaped differently with softer edges. Either way, she had been building a legal case against me, with the calm patience of someone who had thought through the long game. I photographed every page with my phone. I put the folder back exactly where I found it. I drove home through the rain with the heat on and my hands very steady on the wheel. The next morning, I called the real estate broker my attorney had recommended, a specialist in what she called sensitive transactions, estates, divorces, situations requiring discretion. She walked me through the market, the comparables, the likely timeline. A move-in, ready craftsman in Lake Oswego with a clean title, she said, could attract a cash offer within days if we kept it off the public listings. I told her I needed discretion, a cash buyer, and a specific closing date. She asked what date I had in mind. "They land in Portland on October 4th, I said. "I'd like to close on October 4th. A brief pause, then "I'll make calls today." She had a full-price cash offer by Friday, a physician and his wife who ran an educational nonprofit and had been looking for exactly this neighborhood. They asked for a clean property and a quiet process. I told her that was entirely manageable. The following 10 days were orderly in the way that purposeful things are orderly. I changed the locks as co-owner and responsible party during the sale transition. I removed what was mine, my mother's oil painting, my mixing bowls, a handmade quilt that had lived in a closet for 2 years. I left everything else untouched. Their furniture, Poppy's crayon drawings still held to the refrigerator by fruit-shaped magnets, Jocelyn's ring light plugged in and waiting by the window. I was not interested in taking what wasn't mine. I had never needed to. My son texted from Maui on day 5 of the trip. "Mom, hope you're doing well. Poppy keeps asking for you. Can't wait to get together when we're back. Love you." I read it, I saved it, I didn't reply. On October 3rd, my attorney confirmed title clearance. No liens, no encumbrances, no complications. The closing was set for 9 a.m. I spent that evening at Cornelia's kitchen table. She is my oldest friend. We met on the maternity ward 30 years ago, both of us working the night shift, both of us running on bad coffee and stubbornness. She listened to the whole story without interrupting once, which is the rarest and most valuable thing she's ever given me. When I finished, she poured a measure of bourbon into my tea and said, "You didn't burn anything down. You just refused to keep paying for the matches." I held on to that all the way through the next morning. The closing took just over an hour. The new owners were attentive and warm. The wife pressed my hand as I signed the final transfer document. I don't know exactly what she had been told. Enough, I think, to understand that this was not a simple transaction for me. By 10:15, the house belonged to someone else. I drove to Cannon Beach. I had rented a small cottage there for 2 weeks, a room facing the water, a porch just wide enough for a chair and a cup of tea, no spare bedroom, no guest towel arrangement, nothing that asked anything of me. I arrived before dark, unpacked in less time than it had taken to co-sign the original mortgage documents, and sat outside watching the tide do what the tide always does. At 6:47 that evening, my phone began. Gavin first, then Jocelyn, then Gavin again, then a number I didn't recognize. Jocelyn calling from a second phone, which told me something about her level of preparation. Then my sister-in-law, performing the role of concerned intermediary for a situation she had not been invited to understand until now. My son's first voicemail sounded genuinely confused. He said there seemed to be some kind of mistake. The key wasn't working. There was a notice on the door. Could I please call as soon as possible? Jocelyn's message was a different texture entirely. Controlled on the surface, colder underneath. She said I had acted unilaterally and without regard for her family, and that her attorney would be in touch. I forwarded everything to my attorney, silenced my phone, and went to sleep. The next morning, Cornelia called before I'd finished my coffee. "The internet," she said, "is doing something." Jocelyn had posted to her lifestyle account the night before. 84,000 followers. She had built the account across 4 years of house renovation content, curated family moments, and what she called intentional living. A careful architecture of warmth that I had watched her construct, one sponsored post at a time. The post showed her at the airport, her expression arranged to communicate grief if you read it quickly, and the caption read, "Sometimes, the people closest to you are also capable of the deepest harm. Healing means accepting that not every relationship can survive honesty." Her audience received it exactly as intended. Several hundred supportive comments within the first hour. Then someone from the Lake Oswego Neighborhood Forum posted the property transfer record from the county site, not as exposure, just as a community update. "New owners moving in. Welcome to the neighborhood." One of Jocelyn's longtime followers, a woman who had watched every episode of the house renovation series from the beginning, made the connection. She replied to Jocelyn's post with a simple question. "Is this the Lake Oswego craftsman? The one your mother-in-law's money bought?" Jocelyn deleted the comment. The woman had already taken a screenshot. After that, the math began to do itself. People who had followed the account for years recognized the kitchen renovation, the entryway, the foundation garden featured in a sponsored post the previous spring. Someone found the Haleakulani Spa check-in Gavin had tagged on his own account during the trip, time-stamped 2 days after the email that had uninvited me. The comments section of Jocelyn's original post shifted in the way it only shifts when a story turns on its own logic. I said nothing publicly. I had nothing to add. The facts were already there. My son drove to Cornelia's house looking for me. Cornelia told him I was not there and gave him my attorney's number. My attorney told him the sale was complete and legal, that I had asked not to be contacted directly, and that any concerns should go through proper channels. He found Cannon Beach 4 days later. I saw him from the porch before he saw me. He was standing in the parking area, looking uncertain in a way I hadn't seen since he was very young. I watched him for a moment before I stood up. "Cornelia," he said, when I asked how he'd found me. "Eventually." He sat on the steps below my porch and didn't try to come inside. That was the right instinct. He left the door to me. "We talked about Poppy first. She was with his mother-in-law in Eugene," he said. Jocelyn had gone there after the social media situation had escalated. He said she needed time, the way you quote something someone told you rather than say something you believe. After a while he said, "I found the emails, the ones she sent to the attorney about the deed." I kept my eyes on the water. "I didn't know," he said. "I want you to know I wasn't part of that." "I believe you," I said, "and I do. But I have also had time to understand that not knowing is its own kind of choice. When you have years of evidence being quietly arranged in front of you and you decide, one small moment at a time, that looking directly at it costs too much." I told myself I was keeping the peace, he said. He wasn't defending it. He was just naming it. "I know," I said. "That's what I told myself too." He looked up at that. Every time I felt pushed a little further out, I told myself it was temporary, I said. That you'd see it, that something would shift. I paused. The Hawaii email was the first time I stopped believing that. We sat with that for a while. The water moved the way October water moves on the Oregon coast, unhurried and indifferent in the specific way that is actually comforting if you let it be. "What do we do now?" he asked. "You have things to figure out that aren't about me," I said. "And I have healing to do that isn't about you. But I'm not disappearing. I am done being an afterthought. That's the whole of it." He didn't argue. I think he understood there was nothing to argue with. Before he left, he asked about Poppy, whether that was still intact. I looked at him for a moment. "She's my granddaughter. That doesn't belong to anyone to take away." He called the following Tuesday, just to check in. He called the Tuesday after that. Small things, kept promises, the only currency that means anything when trust has to be rebuilt from the bottom. Jocelyn's account lost 2 brand partnerships before the end of the year. She relaunched in January with a new focus. Minimalist aesthetic, no family content, no house. I heard about it from Cornelia, who heard about it from someone else. I didn't look it up. That chapter is hers. I found a condominium in Seaside in the spring. Small and sun-filled, 2 blocks from the water. I hung my mother's painting above the fireplace and put the mixing bowls in a cabinet I can actually reach without a step stool. I planted tomatoes on the balcony in May and called Cornelia every Sunday and drove to Portland once a month to take Poppy to the Children's Museum, where she loves the dinosaur exhibit with a specificity I find entirely reasonable. My son came with us in June. He bought Poppy a stuffed pterodactyl she named Gerald with complete ceremony, and he bought me a cup of terrible museum coffee and said, "Thank you," in a way that sounded like it had been working its way toward the surface for a long time. I accepted it. Not because everything between us is repaired. It isn't, not entirely, and I suspect it won't be for some time. But because some doors don't need to close all the way. They just need new hinges, fitted carefully, so they can open again when both people are ready. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years taking care of other people's hearts. It only took me this long to understand that mine was also worth the trouble.